Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Boring History for Sleep. Tonight, we begin by exploring what it was actually like to get clean in the Middle Ages, before drifting into some other quiet corners of the past. A full body bath was not a daily event. It was a luxury, an event, and sometimes a social occasion. The church was a bit suspicious of public bathhouses, for reasons you can probably guess. Eyewitnesses in the ticket hall above saw only a little smoke and felt a gentle warmth. There was no sense of immediate danger. But below them, in the confined space of the trench, an enormous amount of combustible gas and superheated air was building up. Then, in a sudden horrific moment, the fire flashed over. A jet of flame shot up the escalator shaft like a blowtorch, erupting into the ticket hall and turning it into an inferno. The disaster claimed 31 lives and shocked the nation. The subsequent investigation was a landmark in forensic engineering. It revealed a shocking level of complacency that had crept into the system over the years. The fire risk of the old wooden escalators had been known but not fully appreciated. A long-standing smoking ban on the tube had been largely ignored. The investigation led to massive, sweeping changes. The immediate replacement of all wooden escalators, a rigorously enforced smoking ban across the entire network, and a complete overhaul of staff training and emergency procedures. The King's Crossfire was a tragic but vital wake-up call. It forced the London Underground to shed its old, somewhat romanticized but dangerously outdated practices and become a world leader in transit safety. The memory of that night is a somber reminder that even the most familiar systems carry hidden risks, and that progress is often born from tragedy. The safety features we now take for granted are the hard-won lessons from that terrible event. Beyond the official map, there is a whole unofficial geography of the tube, known to commuters and enthusiasts. This includes the lost rivers of London, like the Fleet or the Tyburn, which the tunnels have to navigate. In Sloane Square Station, you can see a large iron pipe running along the top of the platform. This pipe contains the River Westbourne, flowing in its iron channel right over the heads of waiting passengers. It's a surreal and wonderful reminder of the hidden layers of history beneath the city's streets. Another part of this secret geography is the game of Tube Challenge, where participants try to visit all 272 stations on the network in the shortest possible time. It's a frantic, highly strategic race against the clock, requiring an encyclopedic knowledge of the map, timetables, and the quickest walking routes between stations. It's a uniquely London form of extreme sport, a celebration of the system's complexity, and a testament to the human desire to master it. The tube has also been a canvas for public art beyond the official posters. From the buskers whose music echoes in the connecting passageways to the unauthorized guerrilla art that sometimes appears on carriages, the system is a dynamic cultural space. The most famous of these artists is Banksy, who has used the tube as a location for some of his subversive and thought-provoking pieces. It's a space where the official, corporate design identity and the chaotic, creative energy of the city collide. Let's revisit Hedy Lamarr and consider the patent itself. Patent number 292-387 is a remarkable document. It is filled with detailed diagrams and technical language that clearly lay out the mechanics of the frequency hopping system. It's a tangible piece of evidence of her genius, a direct rebuttal to anyone who might have dismissed her as just a pretty face. The patent is co-credited to Heidi Keesler-Markey, her married name at the time, and George Antheil. It's a public record of their brilliant, unlikely partnership. It's worth pondering what might have happened if the Navy had taken them seriously in 1942. The technology could have given Allied torpedoes a significant advantage, potentially shortening the war at sea. The course of history could have been subtly, but significantly altered. The failure to recognize the patent's value was not just a personal slight to Hedy and George. It was a missed opportunity with real-world consequences. It highlights the danger of prejudice and closed-mindedness, especially in times of crisis. Hedy's life after her invention continued to be a mix of glamour and frustration. She started her own production company in an attempt to gain more creative control over her films, a bold move for a woman in the studio-dominated system of the 1940s. She wanted to produce and star in films that were more complex and challenging than the standard Hollywood fare. While she had some success, she ultimately struggled against the powerful machinery of the industry. Her personal life was famously turbulent. She was married 6 times, a fact that the tabloids loved to report. But seen through another lens, it reflects a woman who was perhaps difficult to live with because her mind was always working, always searching for something more. She was not a person who could be content with a simple, conventional life. Her restlessness was the same quality that drove her to invent. It just manifested differently in her personal relationships. For the wealthy, a private bath was a wooden tub filled with buckets of heated water, often with flowers or oils thrown in. It was a genuine indulgence, a time to relax and soak away the grime. In her later years, she communicated with her children and friends almost exclusively by phone, sometimes for hours at a time. This retreat from the physical world into a world of pure voice communication is a poignant detail. The woman whose invention made our wireless world possible chose to connect with her loved ones through an older, wired technology. It was a way of controlling her own image, of interacting with the world on her own terms, without having to be seen. When the world finally came to celebrate her as an inventor, it was almost too late. She was in her 80s, living in seclusion in Florida, but the recognition did seem to bring her a measure of peace. It was a validation of a part of herself that she had kept hidden for most of her life. The story was finally complete. The world could now see her not just as Hedy Lamarr, the star, but as Hedwig Kiesler, the inventor. Her legacy is a dual one. There is the cinematic legacy of her films, which captured a certain kind of old Hollywood glamour. And then there is the technological legacy, which is far more profound and pervasive. It's a legacy that is in constant motion, in the Wi-Fi signals that carry this very story to you, in the GPS that guides our cars, and in the Bluetooth that connects our devices. She is the unseen ghost in our modern machine. Let's drift back to the warm, aromatic world of coffee and consider its darker side once more. The spread of coffee plantations across the globe often came at a great environmental cost. In many regions, vast areas of native forest were cleared to make way for coffee monocultures. This deforestation led to soil erosion, loss of biodiversity, and disruption of local ecosystems. The beautiful, rolling hills covered in coffee plants that we see in pictures often hide a history of environmental destruction. In recent decades, there has been a growing movement towards more sustainable coffee farming practices. Shade-grown coffee is a prime example. This method involves growing coffee plants under the canopy of a diverse range of native trees. This mimics the natural way coffee grows in the wild. It's better for the coffee beans, which ripen more slowly and develop more complex flavors. And it's far better for the environment, creating a habitat for birds and other wildlife and preventing soil erosion. The concept of fair trade certification has also become a significant force in the coffee world. This movement aims to ensure that the farmers and workers at the beginning of the supply chain receive a fair price for their crop and work in decent conditions. It's an attempt to address the vast economic inequalities that have long plagued the coffee industry, where the profits have historically been concentrated in the hands of brokers and roasters in wealthy countries, while the farmers who grow the beans remain in poverty. For the consumer, choosing to buy shade-grown or fair trade coffee is a small act with potentially large consequences. It's a way of participating in the coffee story in a more conscious and ethical way. It's an acknowledgement that the choices we make in the supermarket or the cafe have a real impact on people and ecosystems thousands of miles away. It's an attempt to balance the pleasure of the drink with a sense of responsibility for its origins. Let's look at the chemistry of coffee. The magic ingredient, of course, is caffeine. It's a psychoactive stimulant, a molecule that works by blocking the receptors for adenosine in our brain. Adenosine is a chemical that builds up throughout the day and makes us feel sleepy. By blocking it, caffeine essentially hijacks our brain's fatigue system, making us feel more alert and awake. It's a simple chemical trick, but one that has had a profound effect on human civilization. But coffee is so much more than just a caffeine delivery system. A roasted coffee bean contains over 1,000 different aromatic compounds. The art of the coffee roaster is to heat the green, raw beans in a way that develops these compounds, creating a complex tapestry of flavors and smells. The difference between a light roast, which might have bright acidic and floral notes, and a dark roast, with its rich, chocolatey, and smoky flavors, all comes down to the roaster's skill and control over time and temperature. The simple act of grinding the beans just before brewing has a huge impact on the final cup. As soon as coffee is ground, it begins to lose its volatile, aromatic compounds to the air. Grinding fresh is about capturing those fleeting aromas and getting them into your cup. It's one of the simplest and most effective ways to elevate a coffee experience. A small ritual that connects you more deeply to the process. For most people, a dip in a clean, cool river during the summer months was the most common form of full-body bathing. It was practical, free, and deeply refreshing. Coffee has also played a role in health debates for centuries. It has been blamed for everything from stunting growth to causing heart problems. However, modern research has largely vindicated our favorite brew. A large body of evidence now suggests that moderate coffee consumption is associated with a lower risk of several diseases, including Parkinson's, type 2 diabetes, and certain types of cancer. It seems the bitter invention of Satan might actually be quite good for us in moderation. Let's return one last time to the London Underground and think about its future. The system is over 150 years old, and parts of it are showing their age. Maintaining and upgrading this vast, complex network is a constant, monumentally expensive task. It's a battle against time, water, and the sheer pressure of millions of daily journeys. The engineers who work on the tube are in a perpetual state of repair and renewal, often working in the dead of night when the system is quiet. The most recent major addition to London's transport network is the Elizabeth Line, which opened in 2022. While technically not a tube line, it is fully integrated with it. It represents the next generation of underground travel. The trains are longer, the stations are vaster, and the technology is state-of-the-art. It tunnels under the heart of London, connecting Heathrow Airport in the west with the financial district and suburbs in the east. It's a project on a scale that even Charles Pearson might have found audacious. The Elizabeth Line, or Crossrail as it was known during construction, was one of the largest and most complex engineering projects in European history. The tunneling machines, giant cylindrical borers named Phyllis and Ada, had to navigate a path through London's incredibly congested subterranean world, often with just inches to spare from other tube lines, building foundations, and ancient plague pits. It was a high-wire act of precision engineering, carried out deep beneath the city. The experience of riding the Elizabeth Line is a world away from the rattling, cramped carriages of the older lines. The trains are quiet, smooth, and spacious, with air conditioning and full mobile connectivity. It feels less like a commute, and more like a serene glide through a hidden dimension. It sets a new standard for what urban transit can be, and it poses a question for the future of the older tube lines. How can they be brought up to this level of comfort and modernity? As London continues to grow, the demand for its underground network will only increase. There are always new plans being debated. A Crossrail 2 running north-south, extensions of existing lines to serve new communities, further upgrades to signaling and rolling stock. The story of the London Underground is not over. It is a system in a constant state of evolution, a living thing that grows and changes with the city it serves. From the smoke-filled brick tunnels of the Victorians to the gleaming cathedral-like stations of the 21st century, the tube is more than just a way to get from A to B. It is the city's shared basement, its circulatory system, its sanctuary, and its timeline. It is a testament to the enduring power of a bold idea, and a reminder that sometimes the best way forward is to go down into the dark. Now let's drift away from the city and back into the quiet interior world of invention, thinking again of Heidi Lamar. Her story has become a modern parable, a favorite tale in the tech world. It's a story about the outsider's advantage. Because Heidi wasn't a trained engineer, she wasn't bound by conventional thinking. She could approach the problem of torpedo guidance with a fresh perspective, drawing an analogy from a completely different field, player pianos, that a traditionally trained engineer would likely never have considered. This idea of cross-pollination between different fields is a powerful engine of innovation. When ideas from music, art, or biology are applied to problems in engineering or computing, new and unexpected solutions can emerge. Heidi and George's collaboration is a perfect example. The fusion of his knowledge of mechanical music synchronization and her understanding of military communication technology created something truly new. It was a spark that could only happen at the intersection of their two very different worlds. There's also a lesson in her story about the nature of intelligence. We often associate intelligence with formal education and academic credentials. Heidi Lamar had very little formal schooling. Her knowledge was acquired through observation, curiosity, and a relentless desire to understand how things worked. She was an autodidact, a self-teacher. Her story reminds us that intelligence is not confined to the classroom. It is a way of engaging with the world, of asking questions and seeking answers on your own terms. Let's talk teeth. You wouldn't have a plastic toothbrush, but you would have a twig from a specific tree, which you'd chew to fray the end into a soft brush. It was surprisingly effective. Think of the sheer mental discipline it must have taken. She was living a double life. By day, she was on set, delivering lines, hitting her marks, and being the glamorous Hedy Lamarr the world expected. By night, she was in her workshop, poring over schematics, thinking about radio frequencies and encryption. It's a remarkable feat of compartmentalization and focus, a testament to the power of a passion that exists outside of one's day job. The story also serves as a quiet critique of celebrity culture. We put famous people on a pedestal and create a one-dimensional image of them. We are often surprised, even shocked, to learn that they have a rich inner life, with hobbies, passions, and talents that don't fit the public persona. Hedy's story pulls back the curtain, revealing the complex human being behind the carefully constructed image. It reminds us that we never truly know the full story of another person, especially one in the public eye. Her reclusiveness in later life can be seen as a final act of rebellion. After a lifetime of being looked at, she chose to withdraw from the public gaze entirely. It was her way of finally taking control of her own image by simply refusing to provide one. In an age before social media, where celebrities could curate their own image, her only option was to disappear. It was a drastic but perhaps necessary step for a woman who felt so profoundly misunderstood. The final quiet vindication of her life's work is a deeply satisfying end to the story. It didn't come with a great fanfare or a massive financial windfall. It came in the form of quiet recognition from the people who understood the science, from the engineers and tech pioneers who could trace a line from their own work back to her patent. It was a validation from her true peers, the community of inventors and innovators to which she had always secretly belonged. So as we let her story rest, let's hold on to that thought. The idea that a hidden talent, a secret passion, can have a profound and lasting impact on the world, even if it goes unrecognized for a lifetime. It's a quiet encouragement to nurture the parts of ourselves that don't fit the public narrative, for it is often in those hidden corners that our most important work is done. And now, as our thoughts slow down, let's return to the comforting ritual of coffee. Let's consider its role in the home. For many, the first sound of the day is not an alarm clock, but the gurgle of a coffee maker, the whistle of a kettle, or the whir of a grinder. The aroma of brewing coffee is the true signal that the day is beginning. It's a sensory trigger that helps us transition from the world of sleep to the world of wakefulness. The coffee mug itself can be a very personal object. It's often a gift, a souvenir from a trip, or just a favorite cup that feels right in our hands. It's a small piece of our identity that we engage with every morning. The choice of which mug to use can be a small, almost unconscious decision that sets the tone for the day. It's a simple, comforting, and familiar object in a world that can often feel complicated and chaotic. There's a certain meditative quality to the ritual of making coffee, especially with more manual methods like a pour-over or a French press. It requires a moment of focus and presence. You have to pay attention to the temperature of the water, the coarseness of the grind, the timing of the pour. It's a small act of mindfulness, a few minutes of quiet concentration that can be a welcome pause before the rush of the day begins. Coffee has also inspired a vast amount of paraphernalia and gadgetry, from high-tech espresso machines that cost as much as a used car, to a dizzying array of grinders, scales, kettles, and filters. For some, it becomes a true hobby, a pursuit of the perfect cup. This can be seen as a form of geek culture, where enthusiasts dive deep into the science and art of brewing, debating the merits of different beans and techniques, with a passion that rivals any other hobby. Let's consider decaffeinated coffee, a beverage that often gets a bad rap. The process of removing caffeine from coffee beans was first successfully commercialized in the early 20th century. Early methods used harsh chemical solvents, but modern processes are much more sophisticated, often using water or carbon dioxide to gently remove the caffeine while preserving the flavor. Decaf exists for those who love the taste and ritual of coffee, but are sensitive to caffeine. It's a testament to the power of the flavor itself, separate from its stimulating effect. You'd also have tooth powders made from things like ground-up chalk, salt, or even crushed sage. And you'd finish by rubbing your teeth and gums with a clean linen cloth to polish them. Coffee's global journey has also led to a wonderful diversity of coffee traditions around the world. In Turkey, coffee is brewed in a special pot called a sezvi, producing a thick, strong, and unfiltered brew that is often served with a glass of water. In Vietnam, strong, dark-roasted coffee is brewed through a small metal filter called a fin and served with sweetened condensed milk, a rich and intensely sweet concoction. In Italy, coffee culture is defined by speed and precision. The espresso is downed quickly while standing at the bar, a quick shot of energy before continuing with the day. A cappuccino, with its frothy milk, is strictly a morning drink. Ordering one after a meal in the afternoon is considered a minor culinary sin. These unwritten rules are part of the charm and tradition of Italian coffee life. In Ethiopia, the birthplace of coffee, the coffee ceremony is a central part of social and cultural life. It's an elaborate ritual that can last for hours. The green beans are roasted over an open flame, ground by hand, and then brewed slowly in a clay pot called a jabina. The coffee is served in small, handleless cups, and it's considered rude to leave before you've had at least 3 cups, as the first is for pleasure, the second for contemplation, and the third for a blessing. This global tapestry of coffee cultures shows how a single plant has been adapted and integrated into different societies in unique and meaningful ways. It's a story of culinary globalization, but also one of local adaptation and a testament to the universal appeal of this simple, powerful beverage. It connects us not just to our own morning ritual, but to a worldwide community of fellow drinkers, each with their own traditions and tastes. Now let's go back to where we started, to the Middle Ages, and explore a different aspect of daily life. Let's think about the concept of time. We live in a world governed by the clock, by minutes and seconds. But in the medieval period, time was a much more fluid and natural concept. The day was measured not by a machine, but by the sun, the seasons, and the sound of church bells. For most people, the rhythm of life was dictated by the agricultural calendar. There was a time for planting, a time for growing, and a time for harvesting. The length of the workday changed with the seasons, stretching long in the summer and shrinking in the short, dark days of winter. Time was not an abstract, uniform grid. It was a living, breathing thing, tied to the cycles of the natural world. The official timekeeper of the medieval world was the church. Monasteries and churches used a system of canonical hours to mark the times for prayer. Bells would ring out to signal lauds at dawn, prime in the early morning, terce, sext, and none throughout the day, vespers at sunset, and compline before bed. For the people living in the surrounding towns and villages, these bells were the clock that structured their day. They would know it was time for the midday meal when the bells rang for sext. Mechanical clocks did exist in the later Middle Ages, but they were rare, complex, and hugely expensive. They were not found in homes, but were installed in public clock towers in the newly wealthy cities. These clocks were a huge source of civic pride, a symbol of a town's modernity and prosperity. But they were often inaccurate, and they only had an hour hand. The concept of a minute was still a niche idea, relevant only to astronomers and scholars. For the average person, telling time was a matter of looking at the sun's position in the sky. They would talk about mid-morning, or late afternoon, or an hour before sunset. It was a less precise, but perhaps more human, way of experiencing the passage of the day. Time was measured in tasks, how long it took to plow a field, or to say a certain number of prayers. It was an experiential, rather than an abstract, quantity. The night was a very different realm. Without widespread artificial lighting, the world after sunset was profoundly dark and often dangerous. Most people's lives were confined to their homes after dark. The night was a time for sleep, but also a time associated with fear, with crime, and with supernatural beings. The boundary between the day and the night was a sharp and significant. Hair was a major focus. It was washed with lye soap or special herbal concoctions. Women, in particular, took great pride in their long, well-kept hair, which was almost always braided or pinned up. Our modern obsession with punctuality would have been completely alien to the medieval mind. The world moved at a slower, more organic pace. An appointment might be for after the morning service or around noon. This different relationship with time fostered a different kind of patience, an acceptance of the natural rhythms of life that is perhaps hard for us to imagine in our hyper-scheduled world. Let's think about another aspect of the medieval world: the food. Our image is often of bland, repetitive gruel. And while the diet of the poor was certainly limited, medieval cuisine, especially for the wealthy, was surprisingly complex, flavorful, and heavily spiced. Spices like cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and pepper were incredibly expensive status symbols, and the wealthy used them in abundance, partly to show off, and partly to mask the taste of preserved meats. A medieval feast was a theatrical spectacle. Dishes were designed to surprise and delight. You might see a peacock roasted and then redressed in its own feathers, or a pie from which live birds would fly out when it was cut open. The origin of the nursery rhyme, "Sing a song of sixpence." Food was not just for sustenance, it was a form of entertainment and a display of power. The flavors were very different from our modern palate. Medieval chefs loved to mix sweet and savory. A meat dish might be heavily spiced and also sweetened with sugar, honey, or fruit. They also made extensive use of acidic ingredients like vinegar and verjuice, the juice of unripe grapes, to create sharp, tangy sauces. It was a bold, powerful cuisine that aimed to assault the senses in a very direct way. For the common person, the diet was based on bread, vegetables from their own garden, and a thick soup or pottage that was kept simmering over the fire all day, with new ingredients added as they became available. Meat was a rare luxury, usually reserved for feast days. But their bread was dark, coarse, and full of fiber, and their diet, while monotonous, was often healthier and less processed than many modern diets. Let's consider the medieval fast food. For travelers or city dwellers without their own kitchens, there were cookshops that sold ready-made food. You could buy hot pies, pasties, and roasted meats. These medieval takeout joints were a vital part of urban life. They offered a convenient, if sometimes hygienically dubious, option for a quick meal. The medieval hot pocket was a very real thing. Food preservation was a constant challenge and a major focus of culinary life. Without refrigeration, meat and fish had to be salted, smoked, or dried to last through the winter. Fruits were preserved in honey or turned into jams. Vegetables were pickled. This necessity for preservation profoundly shaped the flavors of the medieval diet, giving it a salty, smoky, and sour character. It was a cuisine born of necessity, but one that developed its own unique and robust flavors. Let's drift from the tastes of the past to the sounds. Imagine the soundscape of a medieval town. It would be much quieter than our modern cities, with no engine noise, but it would be filled with other sounds. The ringing of the blacksmith's hammer, the clatter of wooden cartwheels on cobblestones, the cries of street vendors, the lowing of livestock being driven to market, and overarching everything, the regular tolling of the church bells. The sounds of nature would have been much more present. You would hear the bird song in the morning, the crowing of roosters, the chirping of crickets at night. The boundary between the man-made world and the natural world was much more porous. The sounds of the forest or the fields were never far away, even in the heart of a town. Inside the home, the dominant sound would be the crackle of the fire in the hearth. It was the source of heat, light, and cooked food, the heart of the home. You would also hear the sounds of domestic work, the rhythmic thud of a loom, the grinding of grain with a hand quern, the murmur of voices in a small, shared space. It would have been a soundscape of human activity and natural elements, a world away from our modern soundtrack of electronic hums and distant traffic. And what about laundry? This was a monumental chore, done with harsh soap in large tubs or at the riverbank. Clothes were beaten against rocks, a process that cleaned them but also wore them out very quickly. Now let's turn to another great engineering feat, one that rivals the London Underground in its ambition, but is far older. We're going to ancient Rome to look at the system that made the city possible, the aqueducts. Rome was the largest city in the ancient world, and it could only exist because its engineers figured out how to bring vast quantities of fresh water into the city from miles away. The aqueducts were Rome's lifeline. The principle behind the aqueducts was brilliantly simple: gravity. The Roman engineers were masters of surveying. They would find a clean water source, like a spring in the hills, and then plot a course to the city that maintained a very slight, continuous downward gradient. The water would then simply flow along this gentle slope, all the way from the source to the city, sometimes over distances of more than 50 miles. Our image of an aqueduct is often the beautiful, soaring stone arches, like the Pont du Gard in France. But these were actually the exception. not the rule. Most of an aqueduct's length was underground, in tunnels dug through hills or in covered trenches. The grand arches were used only when the channel had to cross a valley or a river. They were a spectacular but very expensive solution to a specific topographical problem. The construction of an aqueduct was a massive undertaking, requiring thousands of workers and incredible precision. The gradient had to be perfect. If it was too steep, the water would flow too fast and erode the channel. If it was too shallow, the water would stagnate. The Roman engineers achieved this with simple tools: a chorobates, which was like a large level, and a groma for surveying right angles. Their accuracy over such long distances is a testament to their incredible skill. The water that arrived in Rome was channeled into large distribution tanks, or castella. From there, a network of lead pipes would carry the water to different parts of the city. The wealthiest citizens could pay to have a private connection directly to their homes. The rest of the population got their water from the numerous public fountains that were a central feature of Roman life. These fountains were not just for drinking water. They were social hubs, places to meet and gossip. The aqueducts also supplied water to another key Roman institution, the public baths or thermae. These were not just places to get clean. They were vast, opulent leisure complexes. A Roman citizen could spend a whole afternoon there, moving through a series of pools with different temperatures: the hot caldarium, the warm tepidarium, and the cold frigidarium. The baths also had gyms, libraries, and gardens. They were a cornerstone of Roman social life, and they were only possible because of the constant, massive supply of fresh water from the aqueducts. Maintaining the aqueducts was a full-time job. A special team of watermen, the equarii, were responsible for constantly monitoring the channels, clearing out debris, and repairing leaks. The water, being rich in minerals, would leave behind calcium carbonate deposits called sinter, which could eventually clog the channels. The equarii would have to periodically shut down sections of the aqueduct and chip away these deposits by hand. It was a difficult and never-ending task. When the Roman Empire fell, the knowledge of how to build and maintain these magnificent structures was largely lost. The aqueducts fell into disrepair, and the great cities of the empire shrank as their water supply dwindled. The ruins of the aqueducts that still stand today are a powerful and poignant symbol of the ingenuity and ambition of the Roman world, a reminder of a level of engineering that would not be equaled for over 1,000 years. Let's consider a historical mystery, one that has puzzled scholars for centuries: the disappearance of the Roanoke colony. In 1587, a group of about 115 English settlers, including women and children, established a colony on Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. The colony's governor, John White, sailed back to England later that year to get more supplies. White's return to Roanoke was delayed for 3 long years due to a war between England and Spain. When he finally managed to get back to the island in 1590, he found the settlement completely deserted. The houses had been dismantled, not burned or destroyed. There were no signs of a struggle. The only clues were the word Croatoan, carved into a post of the fort, and the letters CRO carved into a nearby tree. The smell of the medieval world wasn't just unwashed bodies. It was a symphony of wood smoke, damp wool, livestock, baking bread, and the ever-present scent of the natural world pressing in. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, now known as Hatteras Island, and also the name of a local Native American tribe that was known to be friendly with the English. The natural assumption was that the colonists had moved to Croatoan Island, but bad weather prevented White from sailing to the island to investigate. He was forced to return to England, and he never saw his family, including his granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas, ever again. The fate of the lost colony has been the subject of endless speculation ever since. Did they all travel to Croatoan Island? If so, what happened to them there? One of the most enduring theories is that they assimilated with the local tribes. The colonists, facing starvation and abandonment, may have decided their best chance for survival was to join a friendly Native American community, intermarrying and adopting their way of life. There is some circumstantial evidence to support this theory. Later, explorers and settlers reported encountering Native Americans with gray eyes and light-colored hair, and who knew some English words and traditions. These stories are tantalizing, but they are not definitive proof. The idea of the settlers going native is a romantic one. a story of cultural blending and survival against the odds. Another, darker theory is that the colonists were wiped out, either by a hostile tribe or by the Spanish, who had a presence in nearby Florida and saw the English colony as a threat. However, the lack of any physical evidence of a battle at the Roanoke site makes this less likely. The carefully dismantled houses suggest a planned, orderly departure, not a panicked flight from an attack. A more mundane, but perhaps more plausible explanation is that the colonists split up into smaller groups. Some may have gone to Croatoan Island, while others may have attempted to sail back to England in a small boat and were lost at sea. Or perhaps they moved inland, up the rivers, in search of a more hospitable location. The carving may have been a message indicating the destination of just one group. Recent archaeological work has added new layers to the mystery. Excavations on Hatteras Island have uncovered English pottery and other artifacts from the late 16th century, mixed in with Native American artifacts, suggesting that at least some of the colonists did live there. But the scale of the presence is still unclear. Was it the entire colony, or just a small handful of survivors? The mystery of Roanoke endures because it is a story with no ending. It's a human drama that plays out in our imagination. We are left to wonder about the fate of those men, women, and children, abandoned on the edge of a vast, unknown continent. Did they meet a tragic end, or did they find a new beginning in a new culture? The silence they left behind is what makes their story so haunting and so endlessly fascinating. Let's turn to the history of a single, simple object, one that has had a profound impact on knowledge and culture: the book. Before the invention of the printing press, every book was a unique, handmade object. The creation of a single medieval manuscript was an incredibly slow, laborious, and expensive process. It started with the preparation of the pages, which were made not from paper, but from animal skin, either parchment, from sheep or goats, or vellum, from calves. The skins had to be soaked, scraped, and stretched to create a smooth, durable writing surface. Once the pages were ready, a scribe would carefully rule them with faint lines to guide the lettering. Then, using a quill pen cut from a goose feather and ink made from ingredients like soot or oak galls, the scribe would begin the painstaking work of copying the text, letter by letter. A single book could take a team of scribes months or even years to complete. Many manuscripts were also beautifully decorated by an artist called an illuminator. They would add intricate borders, small painted scenes called miniatures, and large, ornate capital letters at the beginning of chapters. They used paints made from ground minerals and even precious materials like gold leaf, which would be carefully applied to make the page gleam. These illuminated manuscripts were not just texts. They were works of art, commissioned by wealthy patrons or created in monasteries as acts of religious devotion. Cleanliness was also tied to your soul. A clean body was seen as a reflection of a clean spirit. It was a way of showing respect to God, to your neighbors, and to yourself. Because books were so rare and valuable, they were often chained to the shelves in libraries to prevent theft. A medieval library was not a place where you could browse freely. It was a secure archive, and reading was a serious, often supervised activity. The idea of a personal library was a luxury available only to the richest kings and nobles. For most people, the only book they might ever see was the Bible on the altar of their local church. Everything changed in the mid-15th century with Johannes Gutenberg's invention of the printing press with movable type. This was one of the most significant technological revolutions in human history. Instead of copying a book by hand, a printer could set the text once using individual metal letters, and then print hundreds or even thousands of identical copies. The cost of producing a book plummeted, and for the first time, information could be mass-produced. The impact of the printing press was immense. It fueled the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the scientific revolution. New ideas could spread across Europe with unprecedented speed. Martin Luther's 95 Theses, for example, were printed and distributed widely, sparking the Protestant Reformation. Scientific discoveries could be shared with a community of scholars, allowing for collaboration and rapid progress. The printing press broke the monopoly on information that had been held by the church and the ruling classes. With the rise of printing, a new kind of book culture emerged. Books became smaller, cheaper, and more accessible. The paperback revolution of the 19th and 20th centuries made books a true mass-market commodity. The lending library and, later, the public library made reading accessible to everyone, regardless of their income. The book became a tool for self-education, a source of entertainment, and a window onto other worlds for millions of people. In our own time, we are living through another great transformation in the history of the book, the digital revolution. E-books and audiobooks have changed the way we read and access texts. We can now carry a whole library in our pocket. This has created new opportunities, but also new anxieties. Will the physical book disappear? Is the experience of reading on a screen the same as reading on a page? It's a debate that echoes the anxieties that greeted the arrival of the printing press centuries ago. But the physical book has proven to be a remarkably resilient object. There is something deeply satisfying about the tactile experience of a book. The weight in your hands, the texture of the paper, the sound of a turning page, even the smell of old paper and ink. For many readers, these sensory details are an integral part of the pleasure of reading. The book is not just a container for information, it is an experience in itself. From the painstakingly illuminated manuscript to the mass-market paperback to the flickering screen of an e-reader, the form of the book has constantly evolved. But its core function has remained the same: to store and transmit human stories, ideas, and knowledge across time and space. The book is a time machine, a conversation with the past, and a gift to the future. It is one of our most powerful and enduring technologies. Let's consider a figure from the fringes of history, a man whose life story is both bizarre and tragic: Emperor Norton of the United States. His real name was Joshua Norton, and he was a successful businessman in San Francisco in the 1850s. He made a fortune in real estate and commodities, but he lost it all in a disastrous attempt to corner the market on rice. This financial ruin seems to have unhinged him. In 1859, Norton walked into the offices of a San Francisco newspaper and handed them a proclamation. It declared that, due to the inadequacies of the existing political system, he was assuming the title of Norton I, Emperor of the United States. The newspaper, sensing a good story, printed it as a joke. But Norton was deadly serious. From that day on, he lived as if he were the monarch of America. Emperor Norton became a beloved and iconic figure in San Francisco. He would stroll the streets in a blue military-style uniform with gold epaulets, often carrying a walking stick or a ceremonial sword. He would inspect the city's public works, debate philosophy with anyone who would listen, and issue a steady stream of imperial decrees, which the local newspapers would dutifully print for the amusement of their readers. So while their methods were different, the desire to be clean, to smell pleasant, and to present a respectable face to the world was a deeply human instinct, as true then as it is now. His decrees were often a strange mix of the bizarre and the surprisingly prescient. He abolished the U.S. Congress and the Democratic and Republican parties, citing their endless bitter arguments. In one of his most famous proclamations, he ordered the construction of a suspension bridge connecting San Francisco and Oakland. Decades after his death, the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge was built, and there have been many campaigns to rename it the Emperor Norton Bridge in his honor. The citizens of San Francisco embraced their eccentric emperor. He had no money, but he ate for free in the city's best restaurants, which proudly displayed signs that read, "By appointment to His Imperial Majesty Emperor Norton I." Theaters reserved a balcony seat for him at every performance. The city's transport companies accepted his self-printed currency. He was, in a sense, a living piece of public art, a mascot for a city that has always celebrated its nonconformists. When a new, overzealous police officer once arrested Norton for vagrancy, there was a huge public outcry. The police chief quickly ordered his release and issued a formal apology to the emperor. From then on, the police would salute him when he passed in the street. San Francisco had decided to participate in his delusion, to treat him with the dignity he claimed for himself. It was an act of collective kindness and whimsy. Emperor Norton ruled his imaginary empire for 21 years. He died suddenly in 1880, collapsing on a street corner while on his way to a lecture. His funeral was a massive event. It was said that over 10,000 people, from all walks of life, turned out to pay their respects to the man who had been their emperor. He had arrived in San Francisco as a wealthy businessman, but he was mourned as a king. The story of Emperor Norton is a strange and touching one. Was he a madman or a brilliant performance artist? Was he a figure of pity or a man who, having lost everything, decided to reinvent himself in the most audacious way possible? Perhaps he was all of these things. His story is a testament to the power of self-creation and the remarkable tolerance and affection of a city that chose to play along. Let's travel now to the windswept, treeless landscape of Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. This is one of the most isolated inhabited places on Earth, and it is home to one of archaeology's most enduring mysteries, the moai. These are the giant monolithic stone statues, with their distinctive long faces and heavy brows, that stand guard along the island's coastline. Between the 13th and 16th centuries, the people of Rapa Nui carved nearly 900 of these statues from the volcanic rock of a single quarry on the island. The statues are huge, with the average one standing about 13 feet tall and weighing 14 tons. How an ancient society, with no wheels, no draft animals, and no metal tools, managed to carve and transport these colossal figures across the island is a question that has baffled researchers for generations. The carving was done in the quarry, using stone tools called toki. The sculptors would chip away at the volcanic tuff, leaving the statue attached to the bedrock only by a thin keel along its back. The final, delicate work of detaching it would have been a moment of great tension. A single mistake could crack the statue, wasting years of labor. The quarry is still littered with hundreds of unfinished statues, abandoned in various stages of completion. The real mystery is the transportation. How did they move these multi-ton giants for miles across uneven terrain? The oral traditions of the Rapa Nui people say that the statues walked to their platforms. For a long time, this was dismissed as a metaphor. But recent experimental archaeology suggests it might be literally true. By rocking a replica statue from side to side with ropes, researchers have shown that it is possible to walk it forward in a shuffling motion, much like moving a heavy refrigerator. Once the moai reached their destination, they were erected on large stone platforms called AHU. Many of them were also fitted with a hat, or pukao, a large cylinder of red scoria, another type of volcanic rock that was placed on top of their heads. These pukao themselves weigh several tons and were carved at a different quarry, adding another layer of engineering complexity to the puzzle. So, before you get truly comfortable, perhaps take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a quiet and simple way to support the channel. It wasn't about being sterile. It was about managing the dirt, the smells, and the textures of life in a world made of wood, stone, and earth. And now, let's drift somewhere else entirely. Why did they do it? The most widely accepted theory is that the moai were representations of deified ancestors. Each statue may have been commissioned by a particular clan to watch over their village, with its back to the sea, projecting its spiritual power, or mana, over the land and its people. The competitive building of ever larger and more impressive moai may have become a way for different clans to display their power and prestige. The story of Easter Island is also a cautionary tale. When Europeans first arrived in the 18th century, they found a small, struggling population living on a barren, treeless island. Yet pollen analysis of ancient lake sediments has shown that the island was once covered in a lush palm forest. The dominant theory is that the islanders, in their frenzy to build and transport the moai, cut down all the trees for logs to use as rollers or levers, and for rope. This self-inflicted ecological collapse, or ecocide, would have had devastating consequences. Without trees, the soil eroded, crop yields fell, and the islanders could no longer build the large canoes they needed for deep-sea fishing. Society descended into warfare and chaos, and the statue building ceased. The island became a stark lesson in what can happen when a society exhausts its natural resources in the pursuit of cultural or religious goals. However, this traditional collapse narrative is now being challenged. Some researchers argue that the island's deforestation was a slow process, and that the introduction of the Polynesian rat, which ate the palm seeds, played a significant role. They also argue that the Rapa Nui people were resilient and innovative, developing new agricultural techniques like rock gardens to survive in the harsh environment. The story may be less about a sudden collapse and more about a long, slow process of adaptation and change. Regardless of the exact cause of its decline, the story of Easter Island and its silent, enigmatic statues remains a powerful parable. It speaks of human ingenuity, artistic achievement, and spiritual devotion, but also of the fragile relationship between a human society and its environment. The moai stand as a silent, solemn warning, their unblinking eyes gazing across the centuries, a mystery that continues to captivate us. Let's turn our attention to the sky. and to a historical moment that changed our understanding of the universe. For centuries, the established view, based on the work of Ptolemy and endorsed by the Church, was that the Earth was the center of the universe, and that the sun, moon, and stars all revolved around it. This was a comforting, human-centric model. It placed humanity at the very heart of God's creation. In the 16th century, a Polish astronomer and mathematician named Nicholas Copernicus proposed a radical new idea. In his book on the revolutions of the celestial spheres, he argued that the sun, not the Earth, was the center of the system, and that the Earth was just another planet orbiting it. This heliocentric model was far more elegant and explained the observed motions of the planets much more simply than the complex Ptolemaic system. Copernicus was a cautious man. He knew his theory was revolutionary and would be seen as heretical. He delayed publishing his book for years, and it only appeared in print just before his death in 1543. For a time, his ideas were debated by a small circle of astronomers but did not cause a major public stir. The A-bomb was ticking, but it hadn't gone off yet. The man who would light the fuse was the Italian astronomer Galileo Galilei. In the early 17th century, Galileo heard about a new invention from the Netherlands, the telescope. He quickly built his own, much more powerful version, and he did something revolutionary. He pointed it at the night sky. What he saw would shatter the old worldview forever. Galileo saw that the moon was not a perfect, smooth orb, but was covered in mountains and craters, much like the Earth. He saw that the Milky Way was not a celestial cloud, but was composed of countless individual stars. Most importantly, he discovered 4 small stars orbiting the planet Jupiter. These were Jupiter's moons. This was irrefutable proof that not everything in the heavens revolved around the Earth. Let's travel forward in time a few centuries, to a city growing so fast it was beginning to choke on its own success. We're going to London in the mid-19th century. The city was a marvel of the industrial age, but getting around it was a nightmare. The streets were a chaotic gridlock of horse-drawn omnibuses, carts, carriages, and pedestrians, all moving at a pace that was agonizingly slow. The air was thick with coal smoke and the natural byproducts of thousands of horses. A man named Charles Pearson, a solicitor for the City of London, had a truly radical, almost laughable idea. He proposed building a railway, not next to the city or over it, but directly underneath it. Galileo became a passionate advocate for the Copernican system. He published his findings in a book called The Starry Messenger, which became a sensation, but his work brought him into direct conflict with the powerful authority of the Catholic Church. The idea that the Earth was not the center of the universe was seen as a direct contradiction of Scripture and a challenge to the Church's intellectual authority. In 1633, Galileo was summoned to Rome to face the Inquisition. He was charged with heresy. Under threat of torture, the elderly astronomer was forced to recant his views. He was made to kneel and publicly declare that the Earth did not move. According to a famous, though likely apocryphal, legend, as he rose to his feet he muttered under his breath, "And yet it moves." Galileo was sentenced to house arrest, and he spent the rest of his life a prisoner in his own home, forbidden from publishing his work. The Church had won the battle, but it would lose the war. Galileo's observations and arguments were too powerful to be suppressed. His work, along with that of later scientists like Johannes Kepler and Isaac Newton, would firmly establish the heliocentric model as the correct description of our solar system. The trial of Galileo is a landmark moment in the history of science. It has become a symbol of the conflict between scientific freedom and dogmatic authority, between reason and faith. It represents the painful, difficult birth of modern science, and the courage of those who were willing to challenge the established order in the pursuit of truth. It was a revolution that demoted humanity from the center of the universe to the inhabitants of a small planet in a vast, mysterious cosmos. Let's consider a single color and the story of how it was made. For much of history, the color purple was the most prized and expensive color in the world. This was because the only source for a vibrant, permanent purple dye was a tiny gland in a specific species of sea snail, the murex snail. The dye was known as Tyrian purple, named after the ancient Phoenician city of Tyre, which was the center of its production. The process of creating the dye was incredibly labor-intensive. It took tens of thousands of snails to produce enough dye for a single garment. The snails would be harvested from the sea, their shells cracked open, and the tiny gland removed. The glands were then left to rot in the sun, a process that produced a truly horrific smell before being boiled to produce the dye. The resulting color was a deep, rich purple that did not fade but actually became brighter with sun exposure. Because it was so difficult and expensive to produce, Tyrian purple became the ultimate status symbol in the ancient world. It was associated with power, royalty, and wealth. In the Roman Empire, laws were passed to regulate who was allowed to wear it. At one point, only the emperor himself was permitted to wear a solid purple toga. Senators were allowed a purple stripe on their togas, but that was all. To wear purple was to make a powerful statement about one's place in the world. The secret of how to make Tyrian purple was lost after the fall of Constantinople in the 15th century. For centuries, a true, vibrant purple was almost impossible to create. Other, less effective purple dyes existed, but they were pale and faded quickly. The color of emperors became a lost art. Then, in 1856, an 18-year-old English chemistry student named William Henry Perkin made a discovery by accident. He was trying to synthesize quinine, an anti-malaria drug, from coal tar. His experiment failed, leaving him with a thick, black sludge. As he was trying to clean his beaker, he noticed that the sludge dissolved in alcohol to produce a brilliant purple color. Perkin realized he had stumbled upon the world's first synthetic dye. He called his new color mauvain, or mauve. It was a cheap, easy-to-produce, and color-fast purple. He abandoned his quest for quinine and went into business manufacturing his new dye. Mauve became a sensation. Queen Victoria wore a mauve dress to the Royal Exhibition of 1862, and a mauve measles craze swept through London and Paris. Pearson's vision was met with a chorus of skepticism and outright ridicule. The press mocked the idea of a sewer railway, and people imagined passengers being asphyxiated by smoke or the tunnel simply collapsing and burying them alive. The clergy worried that burrowing under the city was an affront to God, disturbing the final resting places of the dead, and daring to tunnel into a realm that felt unnervingly close to hell. Yet, Pearson was relentless. He argued that this subterranean railway would clear the slums, ease the horrific traffic, and allow workers to live in healthier suburbs while still being able to commute into the city center. He campaigned for years, a lonely voice for an impossible dream. Perkin's accidental discovery launched the entire synthetic dye industry. Chemists began experimenting with coal tar and other industrial waste products, creating a rainbow of new, vibrant colors that had never been seen before. These synthetic dyes democratized color. For the first time, ordinary people could afford to wear brightly colored clothing. The drab, muted tones of the pre-industrial world gave way to a new, more colorful era. The story of purple is a microcosm of technological and social change. It's a journey from a rare, natural substance harvested by hand and reserved for the elite, to a mass-produced synthetic product created in a lab and available to everyone. It's a story of how a single, accidental discovery in a young man's home laboratory changed the way the world looked. And now, as our journey for tonight comes to a close, let's take a final, gentle drift through the stories we've heard. We started in the medieval world, splashing our face with cool water from a basin, understanding that cleanliness was less about sterility and more about social and spiritual order. It was a world of different textures and smells, a world of handmade solutions to the perennial human desire to be clean. A railway under the city. We saw the brute force of cut and cover, the chaos of construction, and the wonder of that first journey. We followed the tube's evolution through the elegant modernism of Frank Pick and Charles Holden, its role as a wartime shelter, and its growth into the sprawling, complex system it is today, a living museum of design and engineering. We met the enigmatic Heidi Lamar, a woman living a double life. By day, a glamorous movie star, and by night, a brilliant inventor, sketching out a secret communication system that would become the foundation of our wireless world. Her story is a quiet rebellion against being put in a box, a reminder of the hidden genius that can exist behind a famous face, a testament to the power of a mind that the world had tragically underestimated. And we followed the journey of a small, dark being from a mythical dancing goat in Ethiopia across the globe. We saw it fuel debate in the coffeehouses of the Enlightenment, spark revolutions, create and destroy economies, and become a cherished daily ritual for billions. It is a story of how a simple plant wove itself into the fabric of human history, becoming both a global commodity and a deeply personal source of comfort and stimulation. All of these stories, from the grand engineering projects, to the secret inventions, to the quiet daily rituals, are threads in the same vast tapestry. They remind us that history is not just a collection of dates and battles. It is the story of human ingenuity, of our endless attempts to solve problems, to create beauty, to connect with each other, and to make sense of our place in the world. And now, it's time to let these stories fade, to let the mind grow quiet, and to drift into a deep and peaceful sleep. Good night. Eventually, against all odds, Pearson's persistence paid off. Parliament approved the Metropolitan Railway, and in 1860, the digging began. The method they used was brilliantly simple and brutally disruptive. It was called cut and cover. Workers would dig a massive trench down the middle of an existing road, build a brick tunnel arch at the bottom, and then simply cover it all back up again. For the residents of London, it was years of pure chaos. Streets like Euston Road were turned into vast, muddy canyons, with businesses cut off, and the constant noise of digging and construction echoing day and night. It was a messy, ugly, and profoundly disruptive birth for what would become a lifeline for the city. The engineering challenges were immense. As the navvies, the manual laborers, dug their trench, they had to navigate a hidden underground world of sewer pipes, water mains, and gas lines, all of which had to be carefully rerouted. They unearthed ancient plague pits, the skeletons of Roman soldiers, and even the fossilized remains of prehistoric elephants. The most terrifying obstacle, however, was the river Fleet. Now just a large sewer, it had to be channeled through a massive iron aqueduct that ran directly over the new railway tunnel. The fear was that a single crack could flood the entire system, a fear that was palpable for both the workers and the future passengers. On January 10, 1863, the world's first underground railway finally opened to the public. The line ran for just under 4 miles, from Paddington to Farringdon. Despite the years of dire predictions, it was an immediate and overwhelming success. On its first day, 38,000 people queued up, eager to experience this modern marvel. They descended the staircases into stations that were surprisingly grand, lit by gaslight that made the polished wood and brickwork gleam. The public's fear had transformed into a sense of pride and wonder. London had done the impossible. It had built a railway in the dark, right under its own feet. Riding this early underground, or the tube, as it would later be nicknamed, was a unique sensory experience. The carriages were wooden, with gas lamps hissing softly overhead, casting a flickering golden light. And there was the smoke. The trains were steam-powered, and despite ventilation shafts, the tunnels were often filled with a thick, sulfurous fog that stung the eyes and coated every surface in a fine layer of soot. It was so bad that drivers and stokers reportedly grew metropolitan whiskers of soot around their mouths. For passengers, it was the price of admission for a swift, miraculous journey beneath the city's chaos. It was a trade-off most were more than willing to make. The success of the Metropolitan Railway sparked a frenzy of underground construction. Other companies sprang up, digging their own lines and creating a complex, often competing, network. This led to one of the tube's charming quirks. Stations where different lines, owned by different companies, would be built right next to each other, but with no connecting passages. You might have to exit one station, walk down the street, and enter another just to change lines. It was a system born of fierce capitalism, rather than a single, unified vision, a patchwork quilt of tunnels stitched together under London streets. A major revolution came with the advent of deep-level tube railways. Unlike the shallow cut and cover lines, these were bored using a circular shield, creating the distinctive cylindrical tunnels that gave the system its name. This method was far less disruptive to the city above. Crucially, these new lines were designed from the start to be electric. This eliminated the smoke and soot problem, making the journey cleaner, quieter, and far more pleasant. The opening of the City and South London Railway in 1890 marked the beginning of the modern tube as we know it, a true subterranean electric transit system. With a growing, complicated network came the need for a coherent identity. This task fell to a man named Frank Pick, a brilliant administrator who, in the early 20th century, essentially created the London Underground's brand. He commissioned the iconic roundel logo, the red circle with a blue bar, and the unique, clean typeface known as Johnston Sands, which is still used today. Pick believed that every detail, from the station architecture to the poster art to the upholstery on the seats, should reflect a sense of public service and design excellence. He turned a chaotic transit system into a celebrated piece of public art. And as always, I love to see where this little show reaches. So let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight and what time it is in your part of the world. The map itself was a design problem. Early maps were geographically accurate, showing the lines overlaid on a street plan. The result was a confusing, tangled mess, especially in the central city. In 1931, an engineering draftsman named Harry Beck had a moment of genius. He realized that passengers didn't need to know the exact geography. They just needed to know the order of stations and where to change lines. He drew a new map based on the principles of an electrical circuit diagram, with straight lines, clean angles, and evenly spaced stations. It was a masterpiece of information design, a schematic that brought elegant clarity to the underground labyrinth. During the Second World War, the tube took on a new, vital role. As the Blitz rained bombs down on London, the deep-level stations became the city's unofficial shelters. Londoners would descend into the tunnels each night, carrying bedding and flasks of tea. They slept on the platforms, their lives organized by the rumble of the last train and the all-clear signal in the morning. The tunnels became makeshift communities, symbols of resilience and defiance. The very system built to move the city became the place that kept its heart beating through its darkest hour. The London Underground is a network not just of stations but of stories. Over the years, it has accumulated a rich folklore, including its fair share of ghost stations. These are stations that were closed down due to low passenger numbers or rerouting of lines. Aldwych, for example, is a perfectly preserved time capsule, often used for film shoots. Others, like the British Museum station, were completely demolished, but some people claim you can still see its ghostly tiled platforms flash by in the darkness between Tottenham Court Road and Holborn. These phantom stations add a layer of mystery to the daily commute. The sound of the tube is a unique part of London's acoustic landscape. It's the electronic chime of the closing doors, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the tracks, and the iconic automated announcement, "Mind the gap." This simple practical warning, first introduced in 1969, has become a globally recognized phrase, a piece of auditory branding as powerful as any logo. It's a constant, gentle reminder of the space between the solid platform and the moving train, a small moment of care in the rush of the city. The system's expansion has mirrored the growth of London itself, pushing ever further into the suburbs and shaping the development of the city. The extension of the Metropolitan line in the early 20th century was so influential that the area it served became known as Metroland. It was marketed as an idyllic suburban dream, a place of clean air and new houses, all made possible by a quick and easy train journey back into the heart of the city. The tube didn't just serve London, it actively created it. Today, the London Underground is a sprawling network of 272 stations and over 250 miles of track. It's an antique that is also on the cutting edge of technology, a system that carries millions of people every day. It is the city's circulatory system, a complex web of arteries and capillaries pulsing with life. It is still, in many ways, Charles Pearson's dream made real, a way to keep a massive, vibrant city moving. It's a testament to the idea that sometimes the most outlandish solutions are the ones that end up defining the future. Let's now leave the deep tunnels of London and travel to a different kind of world, one of glamour, genius, and secrets. We're going to Vienna in the years before the Second World War. Here, a young woman named Hedwig Kiesler was known for her striking beauty and her role in a controversial film called Ecstasy. To the world, she was a budding actress. In private, she was the wife of a wealthy Austrian arms dealer, a man who supplied munitions to the fascist governments of Europe. She was, in essence, a beautiful bird in a gilded cage. Hedwig's husband, Friedrich Mandl, was possessive and controlling. He would host lavish dinners for Nazi officials and weapons engineers, and he insisted his young, intelligent wife sit and listen. He saw her as a trophy, but he underestimated her completely. While the men talked of radio-controlled torpedoes and the problem of jamming their guidance signals, Hedwig wasn't just listening, she was learning. She was absorbing complex technical information about military technology, filing it away in a mind that was far more interested in how things worked than in the polite dinner conversation. Life in that cage became unbearable. Hedwig knew she had to escape. not just her marriage, but the rising tide of Nazism in Austria. In a move that feels like something out of a spy film, she disguised herself as her own maid and fled, sewing her most valuable jewels into the lining of her coat. She made her way to London, and then, with a combination of luck and sheer audacity, she secured passage on the Normandy, a luxury liner bound for America. On that voyage, she would meet the head of MGM Studios, Louis B. Mayer, and by the time the ship docked in New York, Hedwig Kiesler had a new name and a new contract. She was now Hedy Lamarr. In Hollywood, Hedy Lamarr was an instant sensation. She was marketed as the most beautiful woman in the world, and she starred in a string of successful films opposite leading men like Clark Gable and Spencer Tracy. She played exotic, mysterious women, her accent adding to her allure. But behind the glamour, she was bored. The intellectual stimulation she craved was nowhere to be found in the scripts she was given or the parties she attended. So in her downtime, she set up a drafting table in her house and began to invent. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan or pull the covers up a little higher, let go of the day, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As the war in Europe intensified, Hedy was desperate to contribute to the Allied effort. She knew that her insider knowledge of Axis weaponry could be valuable. She remembered those dinner party conversations about the fatal flaw of radio-guided torpedoes. Their control signal could be easily jammed, sending them off course. She had an idea, a brilliant spark of a solution. What if the signal didn't stay on one frequency? What if it could jump rapidly and randomly between frequencies, in a synchronized pattern known only to the transmitter and the receiver? To an enemy trying to jam the signal, it would sound like incomprehensible static. To the torpedo, it would be a clear, unbroken command. The concept was elegant, but the mechanics were daunting. How could you perfectly synchronize the frequency hopping between a ship and a moving torpedo? For that, she needed a partner. She found one in the most unlikely of places, her neighbor, a composer and pianist named George Antheil. He was known for his avant-garde, experimental music, particularly a piece called Ballet Mécanique, which used multiple, synchronized player pianos. Hedy explained her idea to Antheil. He immediately understood the synchronization problem and saw the solution in his own work. He proposed using a mechanism similar to the paper rolls in a player piano. Two identical miniaturized paper rolls, one in the ship and one in the torpedo, would be punched with the same random pattern of 88 keys, the number of keys on a piano. As the rolls turned in perfect sync, they would guide the radio signal to hop between 88 different frequencies. It was a fusion of cinematic genius and musical innovation, an invention born from a truly unique collaboration. Together, they drafted the schematics, and in 1942, they were granted a U.S. patent for a secret communication system. They eagerly offered their invention to the U.S. Navy. The Navy, however, was unimpressed. They saw Hedy Lamarr, the glamorous movie star, and George Antheil, the eccentric musician, and they couldn't take them seriously. The idea of putting a player piano inside a torpedo seemed ridiculous. They politely filed the patent away and told Hedy that if she really wanted to help the war effort, she could use her celebrity status to sell war bonds. And so she did. Disappointed but ever the pragmatist, Hedy Lamarr embarked on a massive war bond tour, raising millions of dollars for the Allied cause. The world celebrated her as a patriotic pinup, completely unaware that she had just handed them a piece of technology that could have changed the course of the war. Her revolutionary invention, the product of her secret intellectual life, was put on a shelf and forgotten. She went back to making movies, her frustration and her genius hidden once more behind her famous face. For decades, the patent collected dust. Hedy's Hollywood career eventually faded, and she lived a quiet, reclusive life, her story as an inventor almost completely unknown. But the idea of frequency hopping was too powerful to stay buried forever. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 1960s, the U.S. Navy, now facing a new kind of technological threat, rediscovered Lamarr and Antheil's patent. Though the patent had expired, the core concept was implemented in secure military communications systems. The technology was finally being used, but its creators received no credit and no compensation. It wasn't until the 1980s and 90s, with the dawn of the digital age, that the true brilliance of their secret communication system was fully realized. The principles of frequency hopping spread spectrum technology, as it came to be known, became the foundational framework for countless modern wireless technologies. It's the reason your Wi-Fi signal can coexist with your neighbors without interference. It's a core component of how Bluetooth devices like your headphones connect to your phone. It's even used in GPS and other satellite communication systems. In the late 1990s, as the tech world began to understand her contribution, Hedy Lamarr finally started to receive some long overdue recognition. The Electronic Frontier Foundation gave her an award, and she was celebrated by the scientific community. When told she was being honored, her famously dry response was, "Well, it's about time." She never made a single dollar from her invention, an idea that is now embedded in technology worth billions. But she finally had the acknowledgement that her mind, not just her face, had changed the world. Hedy Lamarr's story is a powerful reminder of how often we misjudge people based on appearances. She was trapped by her own beauty, her intellect dismissed because it didn't fit the narrative Hollywood had created for her. She navigated a world that wanted her to be one thing, while she was quietly busy being something else entirely. Her legacy is not just in the films she made, but in the invisible signals that surround us every day, a secret gift from the most beautiful woman in the world. Let's leave the world of Hollywood and secret inventions and travel once more, this time following the trail of something small and dark and intensely aromatic. We are going to the high plateaus of Ethiopia, sometime around the 9th century. Our story, as legends tell it, begins not with a person, but with a goat. A goat herder named Kaldi noticed that his flock became incredibly energetic, almost dancing, after eating the bright red berries from a particular type of shrub. Forget everything you think you know about medieval squalor. The truth about hygiene back then is less about filth, and more about a completely different understanding of what it meant to be clean. Curious, Kaldi tried the berries himself. He felt a surge of energy and alertness, a feeling he had never experienced before. Excited by his discovery, he brought the berries to a local monastery. The head monk, however, was suspicious. He declared the berries to be the devil's work and threw them into a fire. But as the berries roasted in the flames, they released a rich, intoxicating aroma, a smell so wonderful that the other monks came to investigate. Intrigued by the heavenly, it produced a state of wakeful alertness. For the monks, this was a divine gift. The drink allowed them to stay awake through long hours of evening prayer without succumbing to drowsiness. The secret of this stimulating black beverage began to spread from monastery to monastery. From the highlands of Ethiopia, the coffee bean began its journey. It crossed the Red Sea and arrived in Yemen on the Arabian Peninsula. Here, in the port city of Mocha, which would become synonymous with the type of coffee, the cultivation and trade of coffee truly began. The Sufi mystics of Yemen embraced the drink, which they called kahwa, for the same reasons as the Ethiopian monks. It aided them in their religious rituals and helped them achieve a state of spiritual ecstasy during long, nocturnal ceremonies. For centuries, Arabia maintained a strict monopoly on coffee cultivation. To protect their prized commodity, they forbade the export of any fertile coffee beans. Any beans leaving the country had to be boiled or partially roasted to ensure they couldn't be germinated. Coffee was their secret, a source of immense wealth and cultural pride. The beverage moved from the monasteries into the public sphere, with the establishment of the world's first coffee houses, or kave-khane, in cities like Mecca, Damascus, and Cairo. These coffee houses were revolutionary spaces. They were called schools of the wise, places where men could gather to drink coffee, play chess, listen to music, and, most importantly, engage in conversation. They discussed business, politics, and philosophy. In a world where alcohol was forbidden by Islam, coffee provided a different kind of social lubricant, one that stimulated the mind rather than dulling it. These establishments became vibrant centers of intellectual and social life, so much so that they occasionally drew the suspicion of rulers who feared them as hotbeds of political dissent. The secret of coffee cultivation was eventually broken. According to legend, an Indian pilgrim named Baba Budan, on his way back from Mecca, smuggled 7 fertile coffee beans out of Arabia by strapping them to his stomach. He planted them in the hills of Mysore, India, and from those 7 beans, a new coffee empire began to grow. The Dutch also managed to acquire some live coffee plants, establishing vast and highly profitable plantations in their colonies of Java and Sumatra in Indonesia. The Arabian monopoly was over. Coffee finally arrived in Europe in the 17th century, brought by Venetian merchants trading with the Middle East. At first, it was met with suspicion. Some called it the bitter invention of Satan, and the clergy in Venice condemned it. The controversy was so great that it was brought before Pope Clement VIII. He decided to taste the beverage for himself before making a ruling. He found it so satisfying that he reportedly gave it his papal approval, quipping that they should, quote, cheat the devil by baptizing it. With the Pope's blessing, coffee was free to conquer Europe. Coffeehouses quickly sprang up across the continent, from Venice to London to Paris. In England, they became known as, quote, penny universities, because for the price of a cup of coffee, a person could gain access to a world of information and debate. Patrons from all walks of life would gather to read the latest pamphlets and newspapers, conduct business, and engage in vigorous intellectual sparring. Great institutions like Lloyd's of London, the insurance market, and the London Stock Exchange can trace their origins back to conversations that took place in a 17th century coffeehouse. In France, the coffeehouse, or café, became the heart of artistic and revolutionary life. Places like the Café Procope in Paris were frequented by Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau, and later by revolutionaries like Robespierre and Danton. The café was where new ideas were forged, where political pamphlets were written, and where the very foundations of the old regime were debated over steaming cups of dark, bitter brew. It was the fuel of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. Imagine you are waking up. It's the year 1350. The first thing you'll likely do is reach for a basin of water on a small wooden stand. This is your morning ablution. The journey of coffee to the Americas is another story of intrigue. In the early 18th century, King Louis XIV of France had a coffee plant growing in the Royal Botanical Gardens in Paris. A young French naval officer named Gabriel de Clieu envisioned establishing coffee plantations in the French colony of Martinique. He managed to acquire a seedling from the king's plant and set sail across the Atlantic. The journey was perilous, fraught with storms, pirate attacks, and a jealous crewmate who tried to sabotage the precious plant. De Clieu even had to share his own meager water ration with the seedling to keep it alive. De Clieu's seedlings survived the journey. It was planted in Martinique and thrived in the Caribbean climate. From this single plant, it's said that much of the coffee in Central and South America descends. The crop then spread to Brazil, which had the perfect climate and vast amounts of land. Brazil's entry into the coffee market was so massive that it transformed the industry, making coffee an affordable commodity for the masses, rather than a luxury for the elite. Brazil quickly became, and remains, the world's largest producer of coffee. The rise of coffee had a profound impact on global economies and labor practices. The immense demand from Europe and North America created a plantation economy in many parts of the world, often reliant on enslaved or indentured labor. The story of coffee is therefore not just one of pleasant aromas and intellectual debate. It is also intertwined with the dark histories of colonialism and exploitation. The simple cup of coffee on your table is the end product of a long and often brutal global supply chain. The 20th century brought further innovations that changed how we consume coffee. In 1901, the Japanese-American chemist Satoru Kato invented the first successful method for creating a stable, soluble coffee powder. This was instant coffee. While perhaps horrifying to purists, its convenience was undeniable, especially for soldiers in the field. During both World Wars, instant coffee became a vital part of a soldier's rations, providing a much-needed boost of caffeine and a small taste of home. Another key invention was the espresso machine, perfected in Italy in the early 20th century. Espresso, meaning, quote, expressed or pressed out, used steam and hot water forced through finely ground coffee to produce a small, concentrated, and intensely flavorful shot. This new, faster way of brewing coffee gave rise to a whole new culture, centered around the stand-up espresso bar and the skilled barista. Italian coffee culture, with its cappuccinos, lattes, and macchiatos, would eventually spread across the globe. In the latter half of the 20th century, a new kind of coffee house emerged, particularly in the United States. It started with small, independent roasters who were passionate about specialty coffee, sourcing high-quality, single-origin beans and treating coffee not as a generic commodity, but as an artisanal product, much like wine. This movement culminated in the rise of global coffee chains like Starbucks, which took the European-style cafe experience and adapted it for a fast-paced, globalized world, creating what some call the second wave of coffee culture. Today, we are said to be in the third wave of coffee. This is a movement that is hyper-focused on the provenance of the bean, ethical sourcing, and the craft of brewing. It's the world of the micro-roaster. The meticulously sourced single-origin bean from a specific farm in Ethiopia or Colombia, and a dizzying array of brewing methods like pour-over, AeroPress, and cold brew. It's a return to appreciating coffee for its complex flavors and its unique story. A story that begins with a goat herder on a distant plateau. The simple act of drinking coffee has become a daily ritual for billions of people. It is the punctuation mark of our days, the kickstart to the morning, the reason for a midday break, the companion to a late-night work session. It is both a deeply personal habit and a globally shared experience. From a legendary goat to the bustling coffee houses of the Enlightenment, to the quiet cup in your hands right now, the journey of this humble bean is a story of discovery, trade, revolution, and ritual. It's the story of how a bitter berry changed the world. Let's allow the aroma of coffee to fade and drift back to the London Underground. To another aspect of its story, we are returning to the era of Frank Pick and his obsession with total design. Pick understood that for the tube to feel safe, reliable, and modern, every single element needed to communicate those values. This extended to the very architecture of the stations themselves. He hired a man named Charles Holden, an architect who would come to define the look of the underground in the 1920s and 30s. Holden's designs were revolutionary for their time. He embraced a clean, modernist style, using simple geometric shapes, reinforced concrete, and vast panes of glass. His stations, particularly on the extensions of the Piccadilly and Northern lines, were described as, quote, brick boxes with glass lids. They were designed to be beacons of light and order. At night, the large, illuminated roundels and the light pouring from the tall windows of the ticket halls acted as welcoming landmarks in the sprawling, dark suburbs of London. You splash your face and, most importantly, wash your hands. Hand washing was a huge deal, not for germ theory, but for social and religious purity. You'd wash before and after every meal. Inside, Holden's stations were models of efficiency and clarity. He used durable, easy-to-clean materials like travertine, marble, and bronze. The signage, using Pick's commissioned Johnston typeface, was integrated directly into the architecture. The goal was to guide the passenger intuitively through the space, from the street to the train, with a minimum of confusion. There was a kind of civic pride in these buildings. They were not just transit hubs, but temples of modern transport, built for the common person. This commitment to design trickled down to the smallest details, including the iconic seat upholstery, known as moquette. These were durable, wool-based fabrics designed to withstand the wear and tear of millions of passengers. But there were also an opportunity for artistic expression. The patterns were deliberately complex and multicolored, a design trick to hide dirt and wear, but they also became a form of moving art. Each line had its own distinct pattern, creating a subtle visual identity that frequent travelers would come to know intimately. The poster art commissioned by Frank Pick is a story in itself. He believed that the advertising spaces in the stations should not be filled with vulgar commercialism, but should instead enrich the passenger's journey. He commissioned a staggering number of posters from some of the best artists and designers of the day, including Man Ray and Edward McKnight Coffer. These posters weren't just advertising travel to Kew Gardens or the zoo. They were beautiful, often avant-garde, pieces of graphic art that turned the station platforms into public art galleries. This golden age of design and expansion came to an abrupt halt with the outbreak of the Second World War. Construction on new lines stopped, sometimes literally in the middle of a tunnel. The focus shifted entirely to the war effort and, as we've seen, to the tube's role as a vast public shelter. After the war, with London battered and funds scarce, the grand vision of expansion and design excellence had to be tempered by austerity and practicality. The network had to be repaired and maintained before it could be expanded again. A new era of construction began in the 1960s with the building of the Victoria Line. This was the first new deep-level tube line to be built through central London in over 50 years. It was designed with a focus on speed and efficiency. The line was planned to relieve congestion on other lines and was routed to connect many of London's major railway termini. It also pioneered features that are now standard, such as automated train operation, which allowed for a more frequent and reliable service. The Victoria Line also continued the tradition of station-specific design, but in a new way. Each station on the line features a unique tile motif in the seating recesses on the platform. These motifs are a visual puzzle, a rebus representing the station's name or a local landmark. At Brixton, it's a ton of bricks. At Green Park, it's a pattern of leaves. And at Warren Street, it's a maze or Warren. It's a playful design detail that adds a touch of character and identity to the daily commute. The next great leap forward was the Jubilee Line extension, which opened in 1999. This was a project of immense architectural ambition, intended to be a showpiece for the new millennium. Each of the new stations was designed by a different, world-renowned architect, like Norman Foster at Canary Wharf. The result is a series of vast, cathedral-like spaces, built with steel, glass, and concrete on a monumental scale. They feel less like traditional tube stations, and more like futuristic underground cities, a stark contrast to the cozy, Victorian brickwork of the early lines. The Canary Wharf station in particular is a stunning example of this new architectural vision. It's a cavernous space with a swooping glass canopy that allows daylight to flood all the way down to the platforms, deep underground. It was built using the cut and cover method, but on a scale the Victorians could never have imagined. The entire station was built inside a drained dock, a huge concrete box that was then flooded, with the park and canopy built on top. It's a masterpiece of modern engineering. The tube is a living museum of engineering and design. Riding it is like traveling through time. You can experience the cramped Victorian brick tunnels of the Metropolitan Line, the elegant modernist designs of Charles Holden on the Piccadilly Line, the functional post-war practicality of the Victoria Line, and the soaring futuristic ambition of the Jubilee Line extension, all in a single journey. The network is a physical timeline of London's history, its ambitions, and its aesthetic sensibilities over 150 years. Let's leave the rumble of the trains for a moment and return to the quiet world of Heidi Lamar after her Hollywood career had waned. She lived a famously reclusive life, communicating with the world mostly by telephone. Her story as an inventor was largely forgotten, and she became a figure of myth and rumor, a Hollywood ghost. The world had moved on, and it seemed to have no place for a woman who was both a screen siren and a technological visionary. The two identities seemed to cancel each other out. You wouldn't use a bar of soap like we do. Your soap, if you were fortunate, was a soft, lye-based substance made from animal fat and ash, often scented with herbs like lavender or sage. It's important to understand the context of her invention. During World War II, the idea of a woman, especially a glamorous movie star, contributing to military technology was almost unthinkable. The world of engineering and weapons development was an exclusive men's club. Her contribution was dismissed, not because the idea was flawed, but because the source was unexpected. She was a victim of what would later be called the attractiveness bias, where people struggle to believe that someone beautiful can also be brilliant. The collaboration with George Antheil is a fascinating aspect of the story. He was as much an outsider in his field as she was in hers. His music was considered noisy and chaotic by the establishment. He was experimenting with new technologies and ideas, trying to break free from traditional forms. There was a synergy between them, the actress with a secret technical mind and the composer with a mechanical, mathematical approach to music. They were two rebels who found common ground in a wildly creative and practical idea. The name they chose for their invention, spread spectrum, is beautifully descriptive. The idea is to spread a narrow, vulnerable signal across a wide spectrum of frequencies, making it robust and difficult to detect or jam. It's a principle of elegant resilience. This concept has proven to be incredibly versatile. It's not just about secure communications. It's also about efficiency. By allowing multiple devices to share the same frequency band without interfering with each other, it forms the bedrock of our modern, wirelessly connected world. Imagine a world without Hedy Lamar's contribution. Wireless communication would be far more limited and clunky. We might not have the seamless connectivity we take for granted with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Every time you connect your wireless earbuds or your phone finds a Wi-Fi network in a crowded cafe, you are using a direct technological descendant of the idea dreamed up by a Hollywood actress and an avant-garde composer in 1941. It's an invisible legacy humming in the air all around us. There's a certain irony in the fact that Heidi Lamar, a woman who spent much of her life trying to escape public scrutiny and live a private life, is responsible for a technology that enables our hyper-connected, constantly communicating world. She was a reclusive figure whose greatest invention was all about communication. She valued her privacy intensely, yet her work laid the foundation for a world where privacy is an ever-receding concept. Her later years were marked by a sad decline. She had a few minor scrapes with the law and became increasingly isolated. The world remembered her as a faded movie star, if it remembered her at all. The rediscovery of her invention towards the end of her life was a form of redemption, a final chapter that recontextualized her entire story. It was a confirmation that her true self, the brilliant inventor, was not just a footnote, but a central part of who she was. The story of Hedy Lamarr challenges our neat little boxes. We want people to be one thing: the artist, the scientist, the beauty, the brain. She was all of them. Her life is a testament to the complex, multifaceted nature of human beings. She was a woman who was defined by her face, but her most enduring legacy came from her mind. And in the quiet of the night, it's a comforting thought that genius can be found in the most unexpected of places, hidden in plain sight. And now, as we let that thought settle, let's drift back to the story of coffee and its social impact. The rise of the coffee house in Europe did more than just fuel intellectual debate. It fundamentally changed social habits. Before coffee, the most common beverages for all ages were weak beer or wine, as water was often unsafe to drink. The default state of society was a kind of low-level, perpetual buzz. Coffee introduced a new kind of sobriety, a stimulating clarity that was perfect for the burgeoning age of reason and commerce. The coffee house was a uniquely democratic space. Unlike the aristocratic salons or the rowdy taverns, a coffee house was a place where a man's social status was less important than the quality of his conversation. A tradesman could find himself debating with a poet, a merchant haggling with a ship's captain. This mixing of classes, all equalized by the shared ritual of coffee drinking, was a new and powerful social phenomenon. It was a place where public opinion could be formed. This democratic spirit was not always welcomed by those in power. King Charles II of England tried to ban coffee houses in 1675, issuing a proclamation against them. He claimed they were places where people devised and spread abroad diverse false, malicious, and scandalous reports to the defamation of His Majesty's government. The public outcry was so immense that he was forced to retract the ban just a few days later. The people would not give up their coffee or their right to complain about the government. What about body odor? Well, people were certainly aware of it. They combated it not just with washing, but with sweet-smelling herbs tucked into their clothes and the use of primitive deodorants made from alum or florals. As coffee culture spread, it also created new industries. The demand for sugar to sweeten the bitter drink skyrocketed, fueling the growth of sugar plantations in the Caribbean and Americas, which in turn intensified the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade. The desire for elegant cups and saucers to drink from spurred the European porcelain industry, as artisans tried to replicate the fine china imported from the East. The entire economy of coffee was a complex web of agriculture, trade, manufacturing, and, sadly, exploitation. Let's consider the physical object of the coffee cup itself. In the early coffee houses of the Middle East, coffee was served in small, handleless bowls. When coffee came to Europe, the desire for a more refined experience led to the addition of a handle to protect delicate fingers from the heat, and a saucer to catch any spills and provide a place for the spoon. The modern coffee cup is a small piece of design evolution, shaped by centuries of changing tastes and practical needs. The way we prepare coffee at home has also undergone a dramatic evolution. For centuries, the standard method was simply to boil the ground coffee in water, creating a strong, often gritty brew. The 19th and 20th centuries saw a flurry of innovation aimed at creating a cleaner cup. The percolator, which continuously cycles boiling water through the grounds, was popular for a time, though it often resulted in a bitter, over-extracted coffee. A major breakthrough came in 1908 when a German housewife named Melita Benz grew tired of the bitter grounds in her coffee. She had a simple idea. She took a piece of blotting paper from her son's school book, put it in a brass pot with a perforated bottom, and poured hot water over her coffee grounds. The result was a clean, clear, and less bitter brew. She had invented the paper coffee filter, a simple but revolutionary device that is still the basis for most drip coffee makers today. The French press, or cafetière, offers a different approach. Invented in the mid-19th century and popularized in the 20th, it involves steeping the coffee grounds directly in hot water for a few minutes before a plunger with a fine mesh filter is pressed down, separating the grounds from the liquid. This method results in a fuller-bodied, more robust cup of coffee, as more of the oils and fine sediment remain in the final brew. It's a favorite of those who enjoy a richer, more textured coffee experience. In recent years, cold brew has become incredibly popular. This method turns the traditional process on its head. Instead of using heat to extract flavor, cold brew involves steeping coarse ground coffee in cold or room temperature water for an extended period, often 12 to 24 hours. The resulting concentrate is then diluted with water or milk. This slow, gentle extraction produces a coffee that is remarkably smooth, low in acidity, and naturally sweet. It's a testament to the fact that there is always a new way to approach this ancient bean. The culture of coffee is also deeply tied to work. The coffee break is a cherished institution in many workplaces. It's a sanctioned pause, a moment to step away from the desk, socialize with colleagues, and recharge with a cup of caffeine. This ritual can be traced back to the 19th century factories, where workers were given breaks to combat fatigue and improve productivity. The coffee break became formally enshrined in the mid-20th century, a small but significant part of the rhythm of the modern workday. The language of coffee has become a lexicon of its own. We order a double-shot skinny vanilla latte or a single-origin pour-over, with a casual fluency that would have been incomprehensible just a few decades ago. This specialized vocabulary reflects the transformation of coffee from a simple drink into a complex hobby and a marker of personal taste. Ordering your coffee is a small act of self-expression, a way of curating your own personal experience. Let's turn our attention back to the London Underground and a specific, chilling chapter in its history. In 1987, a fire broke out at the King's Cross St. Pancras station, one of the busiest interchanges on the network. It started small, likely from a discarded match falling onto a wooden escalator. But what happened next was a terrifying and unforeseen phenomenon that would change safety standards on underground systems worldwide. The fire began underneath the escalator, feeding on the accumulated grease and wooden components. For a time, it was just a small, contained blaze. But the unique geometry of the escalator shaft, inclined at 30 degrees, created a perfect, if unrecognized, flue. As the fire grew, it heated the air in the shaft, but the smoke and flames didn't simply rise. Instead, they clung to the ceiling of the escalator tunnel, a phenomenon later named the quote, trench effect.